I call John Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thought when the previous speaker was referring to all of the people who'd be watching at home tonight, we were going to get a hi mum out of him, actually, to be honest, because it might be his mum and my mum would be about the only ones who'd be watching if they're not watching the cricket. No, I don't think mine is either, to be fair. But anyway, Mr. Speaker, this is a really important piece of legislation, and I'm really happy to stand and take a call on it. I think one needs to look no further than the purpose at the beginning of the bill to be able to agree with this bill and be able to get behind the intent of what is trying to be achieved here. A purpose that says that it's to A, deter, prevent and mitigate harm caused to individuals by digital communications, and B, provide victims of harmful digital communications with a quick and efficient means of redress. Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important that we do these things. It's so often that in the past things like bullying have been swept under the carpet. In fact, in days gone by, it was almost perhaps an accepted part of society, and I think we've moved on as a society to say we're not going to accept that. But over the passage of time that bullying has been around, even in, as the previous speaker alluded to again, the short space of time since I left school, things have moved on. Technology has moved on, and our legislation in dealing with the ill effects of bullying also needs to keep up with those changes in technology. I was sort of thinking about a couple of moons ago when I was at high school, if somebody wanted to circulate, at least a couple of moons, a blue moon, no, it wasn't that. A long time ago, anyway, since actually I left school, if you wanted to circulate some sort of offensive picture of somebody that just happened to happen, you'd have first needed to go and find a camera, then go and take a picture of some description, then go down to, wait till your film was finished, go down to the local chemist shop, get the photo developed, then either put it on a Gestetner machine or perhaps a little bit further on, go to the photocopying place, photocopy it, and then go and distribute it around as many people as you could find. Wasn't a lot of that going on in those times, but nowadays it is of course as simple as if somebody sees something that they think can catch somebody in a compromising position, for them to simply whip the phone out of their pocket that most people carry, take the photo and instantly have that compromising photo or otherwise circulated right around the globe. And so, Mr. Speaker, while in the past we had this stuff going on, as I said, it took multiple steps. We can do it quickly and easily now. It was no less harmful in the old days if somebody went to those measures. But usually, as has been alluded to previously by speakers, the old school bullying, or if you like, that's the way to describe it, was often instantaneous and easy to deal with instantly. But actually, in this digital age, such things can be said, circulated, and control lost of the offending statements or pictures or otherwise is spread far and wide and maintains the harm over a longer period of time for the victims. Mr. Speaker, I spent a period of time as a high school guidance counsellor, and while at times my office felt like an episode from Dr. Phil with some of the types of things that kids used to come in and talk to me about, there were at times some very serious issues that I had to deal with, Mr. Speaker, and those were often to do with bullying and the impact of young people's behaviour on one another. And even 15 years ago, before we had, it was only the start of the cyber age, I guess, texting was just becoming a bit fashionable, and we were starting to see that kind of thing come into play. But I saw firsthand, Mr. Speaker, the impact of such behaviour on young people. And I think it's beholden on us then to ensure that we have things in place to protect those young people and to deal with those issues when they are confronted with them. There's been a lot of focus today and tonight, and I've heard people talking about the criminal aspects of this and how it's going to labour the district courts with more work and all that kind of thing. Well, Mr. Speaker, if that's what's required to clean it up, if we're not going to pass laws because it's going to make the courts busier, boy, are we on a slippery slope as far as making legislation is concerned. But Mr. Speaker, it's not just about complaints that can be taken to the district court, and I think that is the beauty of this legislation. Because at the moment, if somebody does want to make a complaint, really it's very hard to deal with it other than formally going through the police and going through the court system to get it dealt with. But this legislation sets up the empowerment of establishing an agency to be able to deal with these matters in a more timely way and perhaps a more appropriate way than through a district court system. And I've heard people on the other side of the House saying, well, we don't know what this agency is going to do. We don't know how much funding it's going to have. Mr. Speaker, we don't always have to set those things up before we pass the legislation to empower it to be set up. We need to actually pass this legislation. We need to keep it moving through the process so that we can empower an agency to be set up and sort out the details once we've got this foundation stone, which is the legislation, firmly implanted in the ground on which to build this agency. I believe the agency itself will provide a buffer in addressing some issues. It will mean that you don't have to go directly to the police or directly to the courts and through all of the strict legal process involved with that. I think that the processes and powers that have been given to the agency by this legislation are sensible and they deal with things appropriately. The functions and powers of the approved agency will be to receive and assess complaints about harm caused to individuals by digital communications. That's good. B, to investigate complaints. Well, of course, complaints need to be investigated. But I think this is an important factor which has been brushed over a little bit when we've had this dramatic piece of debate happening from the other side of the House, where they're saying it's going to impact on the courts and it's going to just make criminals out of all sorts of people, because this 8C provision in the Act is incredibly useful, because the agency is empowered to use advice, to use negotiation, to use mediation and persuasion as appropriate to resolve complaints. And as I alluded to before, the experiences that I used to have in my high school guidance counsellor's office, sometimes there was dramatic action that needed to be taken and appropriate authorities notified in the cases of sexual abuse or otherwise, and there was a process to go down. Sometimes, as I said, my office resembled a little bit more like a Dr. Phil episode, and so you needed to negotiate and mediate and persuade and resolve complaints as required. And so for those offences that are on the lower end or the lower threshold of the types of behaviour that we're talking about in this legislation, that is entirely appropriate. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend this bill to the House. I also want to say that the establishment of and the provision within this process of the professional leader in schools is also a really important part of the puzzle. For young people, and there's been lots of talk about this lately, don't always have the confidence to go and lay a complaint themselves. It can be a big deal if you've been bullied, if you've been the victim of this kind of behaviour, to necessarily stand up and say it's not okay and to go and try and take some sort of action about it. And in the past, professionals like teachers and principals or otherwise have been able to support students to take those actions. They've been able to encourage them to take those actions. But this legislation actually, with the consent of the student involved, allows that professional leader within the school to actually go and lodge the complaint themselves on behalf of the student. And I think this is a critically important piece of this bill, because what it does is it takes the onus off the young person from having to step up to actually put themselves forward and perhaps face further humiliation, and to be able to come in behind the protection of a professional leader who will act on their behalf. Mr. Speaker, this bill is sensible. This bill is exactly what we need to do to start working harder to keep our young people safe and to improve outcomes for young people in Aotearoa, New Zealand. Thank you.